TikTok suppressed my live because I told you that the Zionists were on my shit because they know who I am. So I'll tell you this story that I was going to say. It's called Thrice Blessed Mama. My mama has a thrice blessed womb. In June 24th of 1991, after my mother had met my father, she had just left Japan. My mother was stationed in Japan. She was in the Air Force, I think from like 80 to 86, I think. 80 to 86, I think my mom was in. My mom served 6 years. And when she had left Japan, she had came back to Harrisburg, where she's from. And she had met my father there. And I think my dad was in the Army for 2 years. My dad served 2 years in the Army, and his father served 2 years in the Army. But my mother's family comes from military folks. And her father served for 20 years and then served another, I think, 25 as a civilian employee. But anyway, when my mom was a little girl, my mom was an Air Force brat. My mom's parents were stationed in England, and my mom was playing tag with a little English girl, and this little English girl shoved her off the top of a shed, and my mom fell. She's a girl, maybe around 6 or 7, and it crushed her pelvis. It flattened it, made it flat. Boom. And I think it really messed up her birth canal. Now, the doctors had told my mom they told my mom's parents that my mom would never conceive and that she should not conceive. She would not and could not conceive. They never told my mom that. It probably would have crushed her. When my mom was having heavy menses, I mean, she couldn't walk for weeks. And my mom said, she said I couldn't walk. I was out of school for maybe weeks at a time. And at the time, their parents would slut shame them. Oh, you must be loose. That's why you got your menses early. Don't that sound familiar? Don't that sound familiar? So my mom makes her first husband because my grandparents gave my mother a choice. She was the only girl. And there was my Uncle Kai first, and then it was my mom, and then 15 years after my mom was my Uncle David, right? So my mom was the only girl, and the middle one, no doubt. And they gave my mom an option, 3. Either you go to college, join the Air Force, or you get married. My mom said I did not want to get married, and I hated school. I didn't like math too much. I didn't like it. I got a C in math. I hated it. So my mom joined the Air Force and got married. And then on June 27th of 82, my oldest sister is born, right? And my sister was born June 27th of 83, I told you that. And my sister was born with one yod. It's called the finger of God, the golden yod. My sister was born with one. And then 13 months later to the date, my brother comes, my brother Nathan. And my brother Nathan is born with 2 yods. Now remember something, my mom is 62 this year, I think, and her brother, they're 15 years apart. So my Uncle David's 47. My sister's turning 43, and my brother's turning 42. Yeah. So they're all in the same generation. Now, when my mom left her first husband and left the military, my mom came back to the United States and met my father. And my dad was fresh out of jail. He was a playboy. Yeah, my daddy was a playboy, honey. But my dad already had 2 kids as well with his first wife, I believe. Daryl and Dakota. I've never met them. They're not really important to this story. My mom gets back here in 1987. She meets my dad in, I think, 90, something like that, 89, something like that. And my mom and my dad were best friends. They were best friends. And my dad fell in love with my mom, and my mom fell in love with my dad. What they didn't know is they were distant relatives through blood, because we stopped doing that whole blood relationship years ago because we chose to marry our people out of love, right? My grandmother was against this idea. She wasn't feeling it. She said, I told you, don't marry Cody Travis. Don't worry, Cody Thomas, Nicole. My mom's name was Nicole. She said, don't marry Cody, Nicole. I told you. And my grandmother's intelligent. You know, she's a genealogist, and I told you guys before that my great grandmother Virginia Calivia Costin was born in Siler City, North Carolina, and she was one of 13, I think. And she was 4 years old when they had left that plantation and came to the north. And my mother's family, they are Levites through Ethiopia, and my father's family are Judeans through a European line through Quakers and lords. You know how kings and queens took their enslaved people. hmm But my father's line was different because they came from Quakers, and they chose to relinquish their lords and ladies chose to relinquish their ancestral, entitlement to marry amongst people of color because they were in love with them. And they were listed as being mulatto and black on slave registers because during that time, it was not permissible for a person who was white, labeled as white or European, to marry amongst them. So they had to relinquish all their lands, relinquish all their rights, relinquish their bloodline, their ancestral homeland, to be enslaved again. And they did. My father's family did. Abolitionists. The Thomas family of the Chesapeakes and all that stuff. They came on the Mayflower, the Queen Anne, all that stuff. But my grandmother was avidly against it because my grandmother was in the Order of the Eastern Star. And my grandfather was a 33rd degree Mason. My grandmother on my father's side was also a daughter. Her name was Ruth, in the Order of the Eastern Star. And my grandfather was a doctor. My paternal great-grandfather was a doctor. And he was a 33rd. Now, my paternal grandmother died young of a heart disease when she was given the option to give birth to a daughter or die of a congenital heart disease. And my grandmother chose to die giving birth to her daughter. And that's how my grandmother died, I think at 38. May 27th of 1975, my grandmother died. Actually on my dad's birthday. My dad's, I think, his ninth, something like that, his birthday. He was 12 or 13, I believe. But they were united. 233rds, Ruth indeed. But my father's birth chart and his blood was feminine because my dad was a Martha in the Order of the Eastern Star through blood, not by title, but through blood. And my mom, through blood and pedigree collapse, was Electa. I'm going somewhere. So when my parents got together, it was the 8th union of those bloodlines on June 24th, 1991 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Polyclinic Hospital on the Susquehanna River. My mom had me 9 years and 3 days from my older sister, and 8 years, 3 days apart from my older brother. And I was born with something called 3 yods. 3 fingers of God were upon me on my birthday. When my mom had figured out with my sister that she had a flattened pelvis because no one told her, it was a miracle. And my grandparents kept it from my mom because it would devastate her. So they thought that her conceiving was a miracle. Was a miracle because my sister was the firstborn grandchild. My mom was not supposed to have 3 kids. We were all C-sections, by the way. I was torn out of my mother at 11:58. I was born 11:59. And when I was born, I was coded in what they said was matter because I had swallowed a female twin in utero. And my lungs were coated in it. I was in ICU for 3 weeks. My lungs were coated and I was not supposed to live because my lungs were aspirated and they were covered in this matter that they were trying to get out of me. And they did get it out. After about 3 weeks, I was in intensive care. But I got out of there and baby NICU, and here I am now. So my mother has a thrice blessed womb. And she gave birth to 5 fingers of God. My sister has 1. My brother has 2. I have 3. And that's the story of a thrice blessed mama. Hope you enjoyed.